Let's be real. We've all got some great advice from our parents growing up, but we've also got some advice that isn't so good. In today's video, I'm gonna walk you through 6 pieces of advice that our parents have given us that we probably shouldn't listen to. And I know that this is gonna make them upset. I know that our parents are well intentioned, but at the end of the day, the world has changed and the advice and the things that we do also needs to change. The first one is that buying is always better than renting. This has been shoved down our throats since we were little kids, right? It's the American dream to buy a house, own a home, to build equity in it. And if you're renting, you're just throwing away money. But is that actually true? So a couple weeks ago, I wrote a thread on Twitter that really walked through the numbers of home ownership. And so the example was you're buying a $750,000 house, you put $75,000 down, you get a mortgage for $675,000, and it's at a 7.25% interest rate, which is a current interest rate. If that was your situation, you would be paying close to $50,000 a year just in principal and interest. And of that, you'd barely build any equity. So the numbers showed that over 10 years, you would end up only building about $90,000 of equity, even though you would have paid $500,000. Now, let's reduce that even further, right? If you only did it for 5 years, the numbers are even worse. So the point I'm trying to make here is that renting is not always worse. Buying is not always better. If you're gonna live there for 10, 20, or 30 years, buying typically ends up being better. If you're only gonna live there for 3, 4, 5, 6 years, the numbers don't look so good. The average person lives in a house for 5 to 7 years, and at that rate, it is not always better to buy. Number 2 is save as much as you can. So everybody I know, their parents always talked about spending and saving. And while saving is good, all you're doing when you save money is holding it for short-term goals. Way too many people are just sitting on a ton of cash with no goal. Here's the reasons why you want to have cash: an emergency fund, if you're gonna have a down payment of a house, if there's anything that you're saving for in the next 1, 2, or 3 years. Above and beyond that, holding cash is just losing value. I mean, we've all seen the numbers on what inflation has done the last few years. You need to be putting those dollars to work. So instead of it being save as much as you can, it should actually be invest as much as you can. There's a huge difference between the two. Number 3 is don't start a business, it's too risky. I don't know if you've ever heard this. I've definitely heard this from my parents, my family, etc. Starting a business can be risky. I absolutely agree. But if you look at the wealthiest people in the United States, there's one common thing. They either own a business or they were early on at a business and they got a bunch of equity there. Owning a business is your fastest way to wealth. And in today's day and age, we live in the creator economy, right? You can be an outsourced CFO, you can be an outsourced marketer, you can be an outsourced copywriter, you can be an outsourced web designer. There's so many jobs that you can do where you're really just like a solo business owner running your business. And instead of being under somebody and they take 50% of the revenue and pay you a salary, you can actually earn all of that. But yes, it is riskier. And yes, you need to set up your finances in a way that makes this doable. That means you need to go into starting a business with having cash on the sidelines. You want to go into it with understanding what to do. You want to have a team around you of people to help you answer the questions, plan for taxes, do all of that. But a lot of the things worthwhile in this life are risky. It's okay to take some calculated risks, just do it well. Now, number 4 is pay off your mortgage as quickly as you can. So this advice is better today than it was 2 or 3 years ago, but statistically, most people still have a mortgage that is under 5%. And so when you're viewing paying off a mortgage versus investing, you need to look at a few things. The first one is the interest rate, right? If you grabbed a home at 8 or 9% and the market average is 8 or 9%, it probably makes sense to go pay off that mortgage because the mortgage is a fixed rate of return and the market is a hypothetical. Past performance does not dictate future performance, so we don't know. But on the flip side, if you're somebody with a 2 or 3% mortgage, inflation is higher than that. Every year, that payment you're making, the $2,000 or $3,000 a month, is actually becoming cheaper due to inflation. So when you have a really low interest rate, it oftentimes makes sense to not accelerate that and instead invest. The one factor that we haven't talked about here is risk tolerance and how you feel about debt. So there are some people who they grew up in a household, their house was foreclosed, and they have this fear that that could happen to them. So what they want to do is they want to pay down their mortgage as fast as they can to provide security and make sure that doesn't happen. And to me, that makes sense. You are choosing to make the less optimal financial decision to make the more optimal financial decision for you and how you feel about money. It's okay to use money for security, but at the end of the day, make sure you look at the numbers, understand the numbers, and view the benefits of doing one versus the other. Number 5 is that all debt is bad debt. And so I grew up in a household, and I know tons of my clients and people I talk to are the same thing, that everything was avoid debt. And in a high interest rate environment, it definitely pays to not take on debt. But in low interest rate environments, it oftentimes makes sense to leverage that debt. So, 3 years ago when you could get a car with a 0% loan, sometimes that makes sense if you're still buying what's affordable. There's also other good loans. Student loan to go be a doctor is probably a good loan. A business loan to go start the business and expand the business is probably a good loan. A mortgage on a house you can afford is a good loan. The goal doesn't have to be no debt, pay off debt as fast as possible. It's leverage debt on assets that are appreciating and try to avoid debt on assets that are depreciating, but be wise with debt. The fastest way to get into trouble is that you get way too much debt, you get too large of a car payment, you get too large of a house payment, all of a sudden your income drops or it doesn't grow like you wanted it to, or refinancing doesn't happen, and you find yourself in a really tough position. And then the last one is to stay at a job for at least 2 years. Or for a lot of parents, they talk about don't switch jobs, right? But statistically, it shows that it pays to switch jobs. On average, you get a 3% growth in your income per year at the job you're at. On average, when you switch jobs, you get a 10% income growth. So what does this mean? This means early on, especially in your 20s and 30s, it pays to switch jobs and move up. Right? A lot of times you're stuck where you're at. There isn't necessarily a place to go up. And what you need to do is look across to a different company and try to move there. You don't want to be the person that has 8 jobs in 8 years, right? When you look at a resume, people are going to say, oh my gosh, I don't want to hire that person. They're just going to leave quickly. But if you look at a resume and say, hey, this person's had 3 jobs in 10 years, each job they moved up, they moved to a better company, they earn more money, they're actually going to empathize with that. They're going to say, wow, that's the exact same thing I would do. I'm not mad at them for switching jobs to create better opportunities, right? Sometimes we do need to be selfish. You don't really owe anything to the company that you work for. You need to focus on growing your skill set and growing your income. So if a better opportunity comes, take it. Don't be the person who job hops every single year, but you should be looking at opportunities every few years. And one thing that you can also do is say, hey, I just got a new offer. Is this something that you guys are willing to match to keep me here? If not, I need to go take the extra $10, $20, $30, $40,000 of income being offered here. And at least you put it in front of them and let them make the decision. If they don't find you valuable enough, then you're going to go take the role where they do find you valuable. At the end of the day, we're all lucky to have great parents. And not everybody does, but for most of us who have good parents who give good advice, listen to the ones that apply to you and then ignore the ones that don't. I think these are 6 pieces of advice that you probably got from your parents that just don't make sense in today's world. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and go subscribe to my channel for more personal finance content. And as always, please leave your thoughts in the comments below, and I promise to get back to every single one of them. We'll see you back next week.